Alright, how y'all doing today? I just wanted to talk about a few things before I show you the clips of my sources. Um, by the way, most of my sources, if not all of them, are white. Also, I want to say that I am not being racist in any way, shape, or form when presenting this knowledge. This is just for my people. That's it. Now, as you can clearly see, it says ancient Europeans mysteriously vanished 4,500 years ago. Okay? Now, I know most of you are going to be like, oh, now remember this is going to be in the clips. Basically, they took the DNA of an albino African to make the Caucasian, and they mixed it with other DNA. But again, they're going to explain all of that. That's why mostly white people get abducted by these aliens. Okay? Now, even here, this is in the New York Times. The study was done in 2003. This was published in 2007. Biologists had estimated that two individuals would be identical in 99.9% of their DNA. But the true figure now emerges as much less, around 99.5%. Now this, remember, was in 2007, folks. This is 2016, so you should get an idea of what the percentage is now. You just gotta know, I mean, yeah, everybody might walk on two legs, but are we really the same fully biologically? Everyone has to think about that. That's why, I mean, think about the different blood types we have. That's still a mystery to this day. But I just want to explain, even China, that's why they have 99.9% of them have the same blood type. It's not by accident, folks. Okay? So again, these links will be in the description, so don't worry. If you want to know more about that, about how they transformed and the genetics and everything, there's a video in there called by Rick Smith, the confections of a European of the Morris Legacy. I suggest you all look at that. But this video is gonna explain it enough. But I know how people, when they talk about this, don't show their sources. Okay, so I'm showing all my sources. Alright, for the people who are not convinced, white or black.
This is a skull of a modern human, and this is from a Neanderthal. Look closely and you can see that this one has a slightly longer brain case. Most scientists believe that these are two separate species, and there wasn't much interaction between the two. But now we know there was interbreeding, and that all non-Africans living today are part Neanderthal.
And that's why another thing that I'm really fascinated by is Obama winning the election, simply because there's only one type of human being on Earth that doesn't appear to have been seeded here by extraterrestrial races. In other words, most of the human beings on this planet are not local. There's a single blue-eyed ancestor that all human beings can be traced back to. The white person did not exist on Earth prior to about 10, 11,000 years ago because of this exchange with higher species in the time of Atlantis. That's when we started to have the first interbreeding occurring that led to blue-eyed, white-skinned people. The only people that actually seem to have been generated by the Earth's own evolution is black people. Those are the only racial types that we have on Earth that you don't see in people that come from other planets, and that makes them very special.
Well, and I was going to ask you, of all these varieties, these 57 varieties in the galaxy, why are we so different, and we have all these different varieties on this planet? I mean, are there some planets that have 4, 5, 6 different varieties of humans, or just one?
Well, here's the deal on that score. We are very, very unique in the sense of the sheer amount of racial diversity on this planet. And this is from multiple witness testimonies and from various other sources I've used, including the Law of One material. What happened is that...
It is fascinating when you think about it, David.
Yeah, I mean, the average
You've got a planet here with different races of human beings scattered all over the planet.
Right. And if you look at our own evolutionary record and what we've gotten from anthropology, there's 5 different major seeds of human civilization that all basically occurred at the same time, independent of each other, where these people look different and they have different basic biological characteristics, and there's no real genetic linkage that ties them together of having the same species or the same racial distinction before. It's like there's 5 different groups that all showed up at once.
Science will say that environment and climate is what did this over, thousands and thousands of years. Do you accept that at all? I guess not.
You can't explain why climate, for example, would lead to the physiological differences such that Asian people have very different looking upper eyelids, and the whole structure of the skull is different in shape. And you have African people that have much larger noses, much larger lips. The conventional explanation is that white people's noses are taller because it's cold weather and they cool the air down on the way in. Black people's noses are flatter because the air is hotter and they don't need to cool it down. That's very, very hypothetical. There's no real science to back that up. It's just a supposition.
Let's talk about Clifford Stone when we come back. Sergeant Clifford Stone.
Silverman and Professor John Biggerstaff about Nigel Kerner's work, Grey Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls. Now, one of the very disturbing things that Nigel suggests in his book is that grey aliens for millennia have been tinkering with human genetics, and that the broad races on Earth have been messed with in a particular way. Some people would read this and say that is very racist, but he actually suggests that racism is something which has been introduced by them. Is it?
That's right, to create separate control groups, just as any scientific experimenter would, so you can watch safely within that, without any interfering factors, what's going on in that biological group. So racism is a perfect way to keep a group genetically pure, so that they can look at what's going on with their experiments. But John can perhaps explain
So if I'm doing an experiment, for instance, with organisms, bacteria, and I want to do something, make a genetic change in them or whatever, very often we'll put in something called a reporter gene, which will then express and change the colour of the growth of the colonies, etc., within this plate. Having seen a difference, which is to the experimenter's advantage, this is actually what I want to achieve, because I can then perform my actions on that. I will then take that colony, for instance, and then split it up into different plates and take the other colonies as controls and then move them to different plates. Now, if we go back really to the out of Africa idea, you know, I mean, partly the fact that, you know, the whether it was a lush environment they were in, there wasn't really much incentive for people to go walking thousands of miles to do things. It's more likely, given this scenario and what Nigel hypothesizes, is that really in the same way that I mess with organisms on plates, that these guys were messing with us as a species, really looking for advantageous genetics. Not so much racism, as we said, you know, these things are running according to a program. They only care about whether they can mess with our genes more efficiently. And it turns out that the molecule melanin, actually, you know, when we mess with genetics and stuff, one of the ways in which we can do it is to use things like ultraviolet light to actually splice the genes in the cells and actually alter the genetics, or to get things to, you know, things we've put in to actually take, so that we can almost microsurgically implant them in the cells. The thing is, if these cells have got a lot of melanin in them, it's a dark pigment, it tends to absorb that light and diffract it and turn it into vibrations, etc. And then the light just doesn't get where it's really supposed to go. And so really, in the discovery, perhaps even accidental, discovery of subspecies of us, if you like, or groups of us, which didn't express so much melanin, made it easier for them to get their genetic profiles into us. And therefore they then sort of sent the white people, if you like, or one group further north. You know, some became the Aboriginals of Australia, some were left in Africa. And so there was this great movement of these different populations, and really then they concentrated on the ones which they had most access to.
Because
so it's not racism in a way.
Yeah, as I said, it's accepted that every person on the planet is basically directly descended from pretty much one Eve in Africa. Now, let's say that was a result, all of the variation that's currently on Earth,
Yes.
that was a result of intervention by the Greys, say,
Yes.
right? Would geneticists not have spotted that in the human genome? Would they not by now have gone, hey, look, this group have been messed with because that genetic change couldn't have happened so quickly? Would they not have spotted it?
A lot of geneticists think things happen randomly, but random changes can then add up, etc. In fact, a lot of statistics says that, you know, random variation, etc., is nearly impossible. And in fact, this has led the genetics crowd really into some really big problems trying to explain things like this. And so what they'll do is, yes, quite rightly, the mitochondrial DNA has fluctuated, and you can backtrack that fluctuation. But what else has happened in terms of other interventions to do with both the DNA and with the things that control what DNA does can actually happen an awful lot faster if deliberately put in there.
Right.
But there is a special, do you want to explain the special about melanin and how it protects the cell, the DNA inside the nucleus? That's very important.
Part of the reason you can't do these experiments, you know, where there's a lot of melanin around, the melanin actually in a lot of people, in black people, it's actually spread out through the skin. It spreads out through the cells and covers everything. But even in a lot of white people, the melanin actually will coat the nucleus of the cell. And therefore the DNA, your central DNA, even in white people, can be actually well protected from the actions of the ultraviolet light.
There's no doubt in people with higher melanin, natural higher melanin, that it's far more likely that that melanin will be coating the nucleus, the cell wall of the nucleus of the DNA. Now the point about that is that ultraviolet light, which is often used to splice DNA, is blocked by that melanin. It absorbs it. It doesn't allow it in to interfere with the DNA. And it could well be, and this is Nigel's thesis, that this was a blocker for them when they were trying to genetically alter the species. And therefore, when maybe just out of random mutation, something like an albino came along, they discovered, wow, we can get straight in.
Right.
And it may well be that the paler-skinned nation, people on the Earth, maybe have that pale skin because of this genetic experimentation to make things easier for them to work on human DNA. And in fact, Professor Steve Jones argues that this thing about vitamin D being, pale skin being there to allow vitamin D to be absorbed and so on, all these theories about why pale skin happened in the first place, he believes it's not an adequate explanation. There is no real explanation or justification for the need for pale skin at all.
Yeah, because I think if
dark skin is always an advantage in every circumstance.
Right. As most people would just automatically assume, well, they went to live in the north where there's less sun,
yes,
so therefore their skin changed colour. But that's not the case.
According to Professor Steve Jones, an eminent professor of biology, that is absolute nonsense.
Right. Okay.
There's just no reason at all for pale skin.
You would want to absorb more light. And, you know, I mean, why do we lose hair if we came to a colder climate, etc.?
Yeah.
So obviously something's wrong with that idea.
Right. All right. And Nigel contends that the white races, the northern European races, have probably had the most interference from this outside entity called the grey alien.
Yeah, and he doesn't say that. It's very important to say he doesn't say that from the point of view of a kind of reverse racism.
Right.
It's just he's letting us know that, right, that's there, you may need to do something about it,
right,
and maybe suggesting ways that we could do something about it. And if you look at the record of the European nations throughout history, in terms of colonialism, imperialism, and what the havoc they've wreaked on the world, it makes the point
that
really.
It's the blue-eyed white races that have got their finger on the nuclear... well, I mean, what about China? Because he mentions the Chinese as well, doesn't he? He says that they've had significant intervention. Am I right there?
That's right.
It's the black people who haven't. Is that?
Not that they haven't. There's been interception all across the board. They found ways of doing it, but the most efficient way to do it is on cell nucleuses that aren't protected by the melanin shield.
Okay. Right.
That's just the most efficient, easiest way to do it.
Now let's come on to the final part